Okay, hi everybody. Thanks a lot for coming to this session. My name is Oleg Nenashev, and today I'm going to talk about pipeline as code with Jenkins. I work as an engineer in CloudBees. I'm also a core team member in the Jenkins project. I contribute to several other projects like LibreCourse, but my main assignment is Jenkins, and actually I maintain a bunch of plugins. Recently I discovered I maintain 25 plugins. I also work on Jenkins core, on some low-level stuff like remoting, Windows Service Wrapper, and I work on Jenkins not only during my working time, but also during my spare time. Just to provide a slight disclaimer, today I'm quite ill, so at least I'm alive, and I hope to deliver a talk. And if you are not afraid, feel free to contact me and ask questions after the talk. When I was invited to this conference, I was said that, okay, you're Russian, so you should talk about pipelines. But yeah, actually I could, because I started my career in oil field companies, but today I'm going to talk about Jenkins pipelines. And my question to audience, who does know what is Jenkins? Okay, almost everybody. And who does use Jenkins? Again, okay, it saves much time on Jenkins 101, and actually I'm going to skip it. So everybody knows Jenkins as CI/CD tool. It's open source. It has big community, etc. And my question to the audience: do you consider Jenkins as a software continuous integration or continuous delivery server? Who does consider Jenkins in such way? Please raise your hands. Okay. And any other theories? What is Jenkins? Probably. Also. So in Jenkins 2, 1 year ago, we finally updated our website and said that Jenkins is automation server. But actually, I would rather go even forward. I would call it the automation framework. So it's not specific to software. You can use Jenkins for many other areas like hardware. Actually, I come from hardware and embedded area. You can also use it for other purposes, not only for CI/CD. You can use it for DevOps. You can use it as a cron with web UI. Some companies use it for accounting automation, etc. And actually, it's not a server in common meanings, because Jenkins can be integrated in our products and can be used externally. And actually, main position of Jenkins in automation system is to work as a kind of framework and orchestrator, which integrates your infrastructure like other tools, Artifactory, Sonar, or whatever. It builds integration code, it provides plugins and configuration for specific cases. Then, of course, you need to develop some area-specific demos documentation, and only after that you get a kind of automation system from Jenkins. It's all, having a framework is good. You can customize it as much as you want, but of course it's also disadvantage from the user experience side, because it's hard to configure Jenkins. Almost everybody hates its UIs with 100 checkboxes, etc. And actually, in Jenkins 2, we were targeting these problems. So who does use Jenkins pipeline? Okay, half of the audience. I'm going to talk what is Jenkins pipeline, what's going on in Jenkins pipeline now, which new features we got, and how it evolves. And if I have time left, I'll briefly talk about my adopter experience of Jenkins pipeline, because I use it in several pet projects. So what's not in the talk? I'm not going to talk what is Jenkins, what is configuration as code, what is actually pipeline, because previous speakers have already described it well, and I'm going to build my talk on the top of the presentation. And I'm not going to talk about specific features offered by CloudBees. As you probably know, CloudBees is an enterprise vendor, but maybe 70% of CloudBees work goes to open source, and I'm going to focus on open source features offered in pipeline. So, as I said, Jenkins is a framework. Frameworks are very flexible, and when we want to build something on the top of Jenkins, we need to kind of build chains, complex dependencies between each other. We need to manage internal and external resources like memory, licenses, etc. Of course, we need to manage tools. We need to set up environment for particular builds. If it's not just enough to invoke Maven for a generic case. And actually, in classic Jenkins, I mean Jenkins 1.x, there were many solutions addressing these cases. I gave several talks about it, and actually you may have heard other presentations. So there are plugins like custom tools, env inject, copy artifacts, and whatever. So you can build it using common freestyle Jenkins, but it's not very convenient, and actually it's very hard to maintain because once you get many interdependencies, you cannot easily track what changes. When you have to configure your flow in 100 different configuration pages, it's also hard to track what changes, especially if you have several admins. So at some point your automation system falls apart and you do not know what happens. One of approaches to prevent it is configuration as code, obviously. And of course, if you want to use configuration as code, everything as code for your project, one of the cases would be automation as code, with same purposes as for other systems. In the case of Jenkins, it's doable. So you can use infrastructure as code using common solutions like Docker, Puppet. There are integrations. You can use configuration as code for jobs, for plugin installation, etc. You can also write documentation internally and externally. For example, translation plugin allows to change almost every documentation in Jenkins. You can also just write something external. You can use Jenkins Pipeline or other code solutions which I'm going to present. And yeah, if we talk about configuration as code for Jenkins, there are two parts. One is a system configuration, and another one is job configuration. And actually, these parts are completely independent, and they have different solutions in Jenkins. There is no integrated approach for both sides. In the case of Jenkins system configuration, there are external tools. You can use CLIs, a library for particular components. You can use Puppet, Ansible, Chef, or if you follow Victor's advice, you can use Docker or whatever other modern solution to manage your infrastructure. Then, if you like low-level solutions in Jenkins, there are Groovy hooks like boot hook, which allow to set up everything with Groovy scripts. There are also plugins like SCMsync configuration, Scriptler plugin. Unfortunately, Scriptler has been blocked recently due to security restrictions, but we hope that it comes back soon. So, what about Jenkins jobs? Jenkins jobs, there were several solutions. Since everybody uses Jenkins here, you probably know Job DSL, Job Builder offered by OpenStack. There are also several other same plugins. And one of the relatively new solutions is Jenkins Pipeline. Actually, it appeared as a Jenkins workflow maybe 3 years ago. After that, it evolved rapidly, and since Jenkins 2.0, it's offered in Jenkins by default. I mean that it's a kind of recommended plugin which you can install when you set up new Jenkins instance. So what is Jenkins Pipeline? One may say that it's just a Groovy DSL for automatic flow definition. So here's an example of such a Groovy flow when you say that you run on this node, then say that, okay, I want to check out from the repository and then run make or Maven or whatever. You can define these scripts in source control management system like a Jenkins file and also directly in job configuration. So this is the most simple meaning of Jenkins pipeline. Actually, pipeline is also a kind of item type. And actually not only one item type, but actually several item types, like independent pipeline job, then multi-branch pipeline, when you can point your job to a specific repository, it will create jobs for every branch you have, will automatically start building pull requests, tag builds, report results to GitHub, etc. And there is also integration like organization folders when you scan your entire organization, for example, in GitHub and set up jobs for any project where it finds pipeline. So there are several options. But actually, I consider pipeline as a kind of pipeline as code ecosystem which addresses multiple use cases. If we talk about current state of Jenkins, I've just spent some time yesterday to calculate stats. So there are more than 40 plugins specific to Jenkins pipeline, addressing directly at cases. There are almost 90 explicit support integrations in plugins which existed before pipeline. And there are also solutions addressing various pipeline cases like branch source, BlueOcean, which I'm going to cover later. Uh, there is also some documentation, samples, development tools, and it builds a kind of open source ecosystem for pipeline. The most of pipeline ecosystem is open source. You can go to GitHub, hack it, propose pull requests, etc., like in any other open source project. So regarding main features, pipeline is independent from particular node and particular workspace. So you can parallelize your build or launch different tests or commands on different machines at once. You can build different stages. Here's build, test, benchmarks, packaging, etc. And the pipeline is also robust about against particular outages like network outage, master restart, etc. It's what you get out of the box. Of course, there are much more features offered by pipeline, but I'm not going to stop on them now. I want to provide a short example. Actually, my colleagues, especially Michael, provided examples of much bigger pipelines. You can use multiple commands. Here I just built IRC bot. It's one of Jenkins applications. I find tag, then invoke Maven within make, and I wrap my command with environment, and then using Docker pipeline plugin, I also built a Docker image and push this image. So in such case, I built the most of our continuous delivery pipeline within maybe 12 lines, and after that I can just monitor images within Docker registry and automatically deploy them to production. So I get almost entire pipeline in such case. Pipeline is well documented on Jenkins IO site. We invested much over last 6 months to get better documentation. So if you tried pipeline 1 year ago and you were unable to proceed much because you didn't know how it works, how to integrate it, maybe now the situation is better. And there is also information about pipeline compatibility. I want to talk what changes in pipeline now and what to expect. So in 2017 and in 2016, I would say that the main focus for pipeline is actually user experience. It's my humble opinion. So what user experience includes? Firstly, it's simplification of pipeline usage. For example, we have released the BlueOcean plugin maybe 1 or 2 months ago. It's a kind of Facebook-like interface for Jenkins. So instead of using old complex UI, we get something which provides basic information, which allows to navigate results easily. And we redirect 95% of users to these UIs because they wouldn't need more complex features. And of course, we focus on integrations. For example, this is a pretty old integration with GitHub. And probably if the build succeeds, you don't even need to check your inbox. You don't even need to go to Jenkins UI. You see that it succeeds. OK, fine. No need in Jenkins UI at all. Other improvement is better ramp up. So pipeline syntax is pretty complex. It's a programming language, so no wonder it requires some study. And actually, other tools offer more or less simple definitions. For example, Travis offers a kind of declarative definition, and for example, Appear also offers declarative definition. And starting from this year, Jenkins also got a declarative pipeline. His example, I'll briefly show it on next slides. Moreover, you got a visual pipeline editor, which allows editing pipeline and customizing them directly in BlueOcean UI without going to Jenkins without coding. So if you do not like coding, you still get options, even in configuration as code world. And of course, one of easy to start improvements is better documentation, which I've mentioned previously. Another change is about libraries. If you want to provide a common framework to your users, probably you don't want to them to write pipelines at all. And if you have a generic solution, maybe the pipeline could be limited to one call. For example, in Jenkins project, we just invoke build plugin in our pipeline definitions within the repositories. It's achieved by libraries, and now Jenkins offers a more or less sophisticated library management engine which addresses common cases. So I want to briefly talk about features we have. BlueOcean. So I've previously showed BlueOcean web interface. Just to provide more details, there you can see particular activities, also summaries for branches for pull requests. This interface is expected to be extensible, so at some point you will be able to write your plugins to integrate, and you can also get additional summary reports, and if you do not like something, you can switch back to Jenkins UI. So this is a kind of simplified view where you can see job results, you can navigate tests. For example, if something fails, you see notifications here. If you expand this page, you will see a part of the build log which led to this issue. So it simply saves some time on analysis, and if you just a common user, maybe it's enough for you. So regarding pipeline editor, regarding BlueOcean itself, there is a good recording called BlueOcean Kickoff. So probably you have seen a Jenkins online meetup page on meetup.com. And actually, we regularly conduct presentations of new features available in Jenkins. So if you visit this page, you will be able to see recordings of previous events, and feel free to follow just to be in track of Jenkins changes. So regarding declarative pipeline, as I said, it's a kind of solution which simplifies pipeline definition. Actually, I would say that it's a syntax sugar on the top of pipeline engine. So there is no surprise. Pipeline definition just expands to common pipeline, and actually we do not have independent implementations. What it provides to you? It provides a kind of standard sections where you can define common logic. For example, in common pipeline, it's quite complicated to handle events like just failure, because pipeline steps in Groovy DSL just throw exceptions, and then pipeline fails, and then it's your business to process these events correctly. For example, to send notification, etc. In the case of declarative pipeline, you get post-build actions like we had in freestyle jobs. You also get sections like stages, tools, agents, libraries, etc. So for common cases, instead of writing a kind of straightforward pipeline addressing all cases, you can define, simplify the logic, and then use it. So this declarative definition is really simplified. And for example, for me, it was a case. There is agent definition. You can also say that for Docker, it's agent, then closure Docker, then some parameters. But actually, this pipeline definition is quite limited. So if you have something not supported by declarative pipeline, you will probably have to fall back to scripted pipeline. So I would say that it's imperative pipeline, but in Jenkins project we call it scripted pipeline. So if you consider starting using declarative pipeline, which is simplified, one of possible options is when you're just starting using Jenkins. So when you migrate from other declarative services like Travis, Appear, or whatever, or when you have very simple use case like just run Maven, make, and handle errors. Another use case is when you have a kind of library which integrates your logic. Then instead, then you can just define handling logic, but within the script you can just call build plugin I've mentioned before. So regarding error handling, as I said, it's one of advantages in my opinion, because actually in common pipeline, it's quite difficult to handle all cases. So here I just catch exception and send email, but if I start doing it on every stage, my pipeline will be bloated. It will be hard to track all cases, and actually I will have to do it almost everywhere. For declarative pipeline, I just add a failure handler, and it works for me. However, if you decide to migrate from declarative back to scripted, then you will have to do it manually. So if you use such syntax, proceed with care. Okay, so regarding obstacles, according to my experience, firstly, it's limited functionality, as I said. Then you cannot put declarative pipeline into your library. So if you want to use something like this, in declarative pipeline, it is not possible for any project on top-level Jenkins file. Users will have to define all these definitions, which may be also too complex for them. Hopefully it will change at some point, but now you can combine these approaches easily. And yes, the migration is pretty difficult. And one of approaches which allows simplifying these definitions when you can decide what to take, declarative or scripted, or when you have multiple repositories. Of course, one of approaches would be to just put all code you may need or all code your users may need to a kind of shared library. And in pipeline, it was possible for a long time. We were offering load command, which allowed loading particular Groovy scripts, including classes, including libraries, and there was also shared library definition, which had structure, and you were able to store it within Jenkins. So you were converting Jenkins to Git repository and pushing this code. So you were able to have also class structure, you were able to have global libraries, some additional resources. It was working out of the box, but in such case you had central Git repository. It was hard to test changes. It was hard to work in parallel because there was only master branch, etc. And actually, there were other solutions like Pipeline Remote Loader, but in late 2016, we have released Pipeline Shared Libraries, which actually allowed storing exactly the same structure in external repositories, manage these repositories partially with dependencies, and you were also able to manage external Groovy repositories. For example, if you need something like Yoda time or whatever, there is no need to write a Jenkins plugin. You can probably use grub and include this repository. So regarding pipeline shared libraries, now it's a kind of set of reusable components. So you can store them directly in your source control management system. You can version them, and then your users can reuse these components in order to build your pipeline. Moreover, local admins are able to define libraries as they want. So Jenkins admins can say on the global level that we use particular libraries, then your project owners can say that on folder level we use different libraries, different versions, and on the within job you can also import additional libraries if you need. So regarding definition, it's pretty simple. You just name it, you say what is default version, you say if you load it explicitly or not, and yeah, that's generally it. Then you say how to get it. You can store it in source control management system. Almost every SCM in Jenkins is supported via legacy SCM. There is also modern SCM, which inherits from SCM API and offers more features. But actually, you can include libraries from your repository like Perforce. And then when you write your Jenkins file, the common approach is to just define a kind of global variable which would wrap your logic. Then it invokes library, and this library can bundle other libraries via dependencies, etc. So as a framework developers, we try to keep user jobs as small as possible. But of course, if they are advanced users, they can write something more complex directly. Here's example of explicit import. So in your pipeline, you can say that, okay, I imported this library, and from this library, I use this class, and then you just use it in your DSL. It works, but in my new projects, we just use implicit loading, which I have already presented. So here's example of pipeline in my new plugin, and Inject API plugin. I just say build plugin, and how it works. So in Jenkins, we have global definition with implicit loading. Then we have a kind of global variable which supports multiple options with parameterization. And we store this library definition directly in our project repository, which is open source. Everybody can use it. So here's build plugin Groovy, which is implementation, some documentation. And actually on the top level, there is also README from which I have extracted the help. And then in code, it just implements call. So it's a global variable, but it just implements Groovy closure and you reuse it. And actually, within it, it contains pure pipeline DSL. It's pretty complex, something like 200 lines, but for users, it's just a single line. So that's how you can use it. Um, just to share some my experience as a pipeline developer. Who has ever tried to develop Jenkins pipeline? Who has failed and tried other solutions? Okay, actually it happened with me as well. I started trying workflow plugin on early development stages. Even before joining CloudBees, I've tried it several times. Decided that freestyle is generally better, but pipeline ecosystem evolves, and now it offers more and more features. Actually, in my last project, I was able to successfully migrate to pipeline. In terms of successfully, I mean that it's working. But regarding how it works, of course, there are many hacks inside. I experienced many obstacles, and I would like to briefly talk about these obstacles. One of obstacles is pretty obvious. It's about missing integrations. Pipeline is a kind of fresh new architecture. It has advantages like robustness against restarts, fault tolerance, ability to run in parallel within a single definition, etc. But on the other hand, it provides special APIs in Jenkins core, and not all plugins are able to implement these APIs. And not all plugins implement these APIs correctly, unfortunately. So there is still a kind of missing logic. I said that 100 plugins already provide pipeline integration. This number still counts. There are several workarounds, but sometimes you just miss the plugin. And in such a case, the only solution is to use pipeline library like I presented before. Now I have something like 2,000 code lines of pipeline libraries integrating with particular electronic design automation tools. If you go to Jenkins, you may find exactly 2 plugins for electronic design automation. So if you contribute to software development flows, then it's much better. And another case I experienced is build promotion, because I'm a maintainer of promoted builds plugins. I'm not a complete user of continuous delivery methodology. I still think that I firstly build something, that probably I do some manual testing, decision making, release management, and then I click release button. So it's not a continuous delivery, but it's how I want to use a pipeline, and unfortunately it's quite complicated to use such functionality in a single build script. Another problem for me was that pipeline DSL is not Groovy. So one may say that, okay, it's Groovy, I can use everything offered by Groovy, classes, inheritance, grab, etc. But actually it's not correct. And it's not correct for a reason. One of the reasons is context retention. So every time pipeline does something, it saves context to the disk in order to be able to restore when your instance fails, for example, or to implement other failover. So if the class is not serializable, then you may see such exception. When I develop pipelines, maybe I see it 10 times a day or something like that. And actually you have to be accurate. One of common solutions is to just say that your function within library non-CPS, so it means that it doesn't store context on the disk. Disadvantage is that it will fail if something doesn't work, but on the other hand, it simplifies the logic. However, if you invoke CPS function from non-CPS function, you may see a very interesting behavior now. So be accurate with this. Another reason is script security. Because if we, as a framework developer, allow users to run every Groovy code, then at some point somebody will call system exit, and surprisingly, not it will bring down your entire Jenkins instance, not only your pipeline. So in Jenkins, there are 2 modes, and both are secured. One is Groovy sandbox mode, when every command is being executed independently, where there are security checks, script approvals, etc. Another option is just approved script when your Jenkins admin is eligible to say if this script is valid or not. Both options work well. Both options require additional permissions if you are not Jenkins administrators. And unfortunately, it causes just run, fail, approve, and rerun flow. There are two workarounds. One, to use solutions like replay. It's opportunity to rerun pipeline and maybe make some edits within a Jenkins interface. It's available out of the box. Another feature is cloud-based checkpoints plugin, which allows to define save point and then proceed from it. And currently, cloud-based is working on open source sync this plugin. So within several months, I hope that it will be available in open source. And last, not even last, but definitely not least problem is about development tools. As I said, Pipeline is a programming language. And it's a common case that the most of automation engineers are not actually programmers. They come from testing, they're trying to automate something, sometimes it's complicated. And if you have a programming language without development tools, it will be complicated even more. And unfortunately, current state of pipeline is like this. So green means that there is something more or less complete and usable. Red means that there is nothing. And yellow means that there is something, but in my opinion, not enough. So the state is pretty far from perfect. And actually, I use a kind of workaround to run it. So instead of development tools, I just run local development using hooks. I use IntelliJ IDEA, which provide using Jenkins features. I get syntax highlighting, built-in documentation. I edit source code locally and use file system SCM plugin in order to debug my stuff without committing. And regarding Jenkins instance, I have configuration as code for Jenkins system, so I can easily provision development environments, and I just use file system SCM and volume on Jenkins test instance in order to test the stuff. There may be better ways, but this is how I develop it now. So if you're interested in getting syntax file, there is a button in pipeline syntax documentation. Regarding file system plugin, unfortunately, it hasn't been released yet. So there is a pending pull request. The ball is on my side, but yeah. Now you can probably use alternate solutions like replay plugin or just build the plugin from the pull request. Regarding testing, probably you have already seen this repository, less threads, Jenkins Pipeline unit. So the idea is to write Jenkins Pipeline tests in Groovy. And here's a simple example. Actually, if you go to the repository, there are many possible definitions. You can write unit tests, then you can put these unit tests directly into your library code. So you can set up continuous integration for continuous integration definitions. You can set up continuous delivery if you want, and actually it simplifies development. But I still think that such solutions should be offered by default by Jenkins organization, that it should be maintained and it should be much more extended before it becomes a complete solution. Another problem is non-success path handling. I've already said about this when it doesn't work. So you can just set up a global try catch or set up a post-build action in a pipeline definition. But actually, it's not a final solution because sometimes I need logic here. For example, if my test fails, I would like to analyze why it fails, and if it's an infrastructure issue, I may want to rerun this test. Because for me, it's a common case when the tests run for entire night, and I do not want to be delayed for another day due to a small infrastructure failure. So the problem is that there is no good solution in both pipeline options. Firstly, you can try catch every possible case, analyze it in scripted pipeline, but it bloats your code. Then you may realize that you may also need timeout definitions just in case something hangs. For example, your script invocation, that your code becomes even bigger. There is no integration with common plugins like build failure analyzer warnings, so you cannot use default parsers in Jenkins. And effectively, the only approach to handle it is just have library which invokes several commands and then does something like 100 code lines of different analysis, testing, etc. That's how my plans are implemented now. It's not ideal, and I would be happy to have a kind of generalized way of handling exceptions in pipeline, likely by integration with these plugins. Um, and yeah, so for simple use cases, you can just use declarative pipeline. For others, encapsulations with libraries, as I've said. So, according to my experience, firstly, even if I was quite negative during the last 10 minutes, generally pipeline works well. It works well for my projects, and it saves much time on system administration, on workflow management, and this is good. As a pipeline, as any programming language, it has high barrier to entry, which requires additional configuration, and lack of development tools makes the stuff pretty complicated. So what I actually need, I'm a Jenkins contributor, so maybe it's a question to myself if I want to find time and contribute. But as any other open source project, it consumes more time that you actually have. So I want to have development tools. I want to have community pipeline libraries, at least for common cases. And as I've said before, I want to have a promotion engine for pipeline when you build artifacts and then can run another pipeline via click a button. Now it's also implementable, but it requires additional hacking. So what I would like you to remember. Firstly, Jenkins is not a kind of cron with web UI. It's a framework which provides much more options and much more advanced features. Pipeline as code is one of possible solutions. If you don't like Jenkins Pipeline, you can use Job DSL or Jenkins Job Builder, but the idea is that you should start moving your implementations to code because it's much easier to maintain at scale. And if you use Jenkins, consider trying Jenkins Pipeline and also declarative pipeline and BlueOcean. So that's what I recommend. Thank you for your attention. If you need more information, you can find it on Jenkins website and other links which I have provided during my talk. And if you're interested to know even more, come to Jenkins events. Regarding incoming events, it's Day of Jenkins in Scandinavia, then a Community Day in Paris, and also it's Jenkins World in San Francisco in this August. And of course, there are many local meetups and many local events, so you can come to these activities and talk to Jenkins contributors, get more information. So that's it from me. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Free to ask. Free to ask. Free to ask. Free to ask.